If you don't watch this video, you might keep blaming yourself for something that was never your fault. You might keep wondering why being kind, patient, and understanding seemed to make things worse instead of better. And you might keep thinking, maybe I was too sensitive, maybe I gave too much, maybe I caused this. But here's the truth most people never hear. Your empathy didn't protect you, it activated them. And once you understand why, a lot of confusing moments suddenly make sense. Let's start with something uncomfortable. Empathy is usually described as a strength, a gift, a sign of emotional intelligence. But in certain dynamics, empathy doesn't calm the situation. It triggers it. And that's not because empathy is bad. It's because of how certain personalities respond to it. Here's the first thing to understand. Some people don't experience empathy as connection. They experience it as access. Access to your attention, access to your emotional labor, access to your tolerance. And once they sense that access, something shifts. Think back for a moment. At the beginning, they seem drawn to your understanding, your patience, your ability to see the good in people. They opened up quickly. They shared pain. They framed themselves as misunderstood. And you listened, not because you were weak, but because empathy is your default. And that's where the pattern quietly began. Here's the first trigger point. When you empathize deeply, you send a signal that says, I will pause myself to understand you. To a healthy person, that feels safe. To an unhealthy one, that feels powerful. And power changes behavior. This is where many people get confused. They say, but I was trying to help. I was just being understanding. I didn't want conflict. Exactly. And that's why it worked on you. Empathy creates emotional flexibility. You can see multiple perspectives. You can hold complexity. You can tolerate ambiguity. But some people use that flexibility to slowly bend reality in their favor. Not aggressively, not obviously, gradually. Here's how it usually unfolds. The first time they cross a line, you explain it away. They didn't mean it. They were stressed. They had a rough past. The second time, you adjust yourself. You soften your tone. You choose your words carefully. You give more context. And by the third time, you're managing their reactions instead of expressing your reality. That's not love. That's adaptation. Now here's the critical insight. Empathy doesn't just excuse behavior. It absorbs responsibility. You start carrying emotional weight that doesn't belong to you. And the more you carry, the less they have to. This is why empathy becomes a trigger. Because every time you empathize instead of confront, you remove friction. And friction is the only thing that limits certain behaviors. Without it, there is no internal stop signal. Notice what happens next. When you finally speak up, they don't respond with reflection. They respond with confusion or offense. Why are you upset? You're being dramatic. I thought you understood me. That's not misunderstanding. That's dependence on your empathy. Here's the part most people miss. They weren't drawn to you because you were empathic. They stayed because your empathy regulated their inner state. You soothed, you explained, you stabilized. And when you stopped doing that, they felt threatened. This is why setting boundaries often makes things worse at first. Not because the boundary is wrong, but because it removes the emotional supply they relied on. And when supply is disrupted, control behaviors increase. Think about how subtle this is. They don't say, don't have boundaries. They say things like, you've changed. You're not as understanding as before. I miss the old you. What they really miss is unrestricted access. This is where self-doubt begins. You start asking, am I becoming cold? Am I being unfair? Shouldn't I be more compassionate? And suddenly, you're empathizing with the impact of your boundaries instead of the impact of their behavior. That's the trap. Here's something important to understand. Empathy without limits becomes self-erasure, not overnight, but through 1,000 small adjustments. Each one feels reasonable. Each one feels kind. Until one day, you don't recognize yourself anymore. Now let's talk about why leaving is so hard. When you've been using empathy as a stabilizer, walking away doesn't feel like relief. It feels like abandonment, not of them, but of the role you were playing. The fixer, the translator, the emotional anchor, that role becomes part of your identity. This is why distance feels wrong at first. Your nervous system isn't missing the person. It's missing the function you served. And letting go of that function feels like losing purpose. Here's the reframe that changes everything. Your empathy was never meant to be used to tolerate disrespect. It was meant to connect with people who can hold their own emotional weight. Empathy is not a substitute for accountability. Healthy people respond to empathy with reciprocity. Unhealthy ones respond with entitlement. That difference matters. So if you're wondering why being kind made things harder, why understanding didn't lead to change, why speaking gently still resulted in harm, it's not because you did empathy wrong. It's because empathy was being used as a trigger, not a bridge. Here's the final thing to sit with. Empathy is powerful, but only when it's paired with limits. Without limits, it becomes a signal that says, you can keep going, I'll adjust. And some people will. So the real question isn't, should I be less empathic? It's this: who deserves access to your empathy and who needs to earn it? That question changes everything. And once you start asking it, you'll notice patterns you can't unsee.